spectators. I'm here. Did you want Mayor?
There's on the other side.
Some have two on the chair.
That one is
Even if it's not true.
This is great. Hi, how are you?
We're not getting out now, are we? We're not getting out. We're stuck. You must have breathed. South African so many
Yes. Sí, no hay que ponerse delante.
the relationship to the Tories. Yes, we it's coming there. So we were hoping for a bit of the timing was important. So I know he's been trade unions. Very good. I remember when you were there. I remember when you were
Sachin, could you please report to the stage? Apologies for the delay. We'll be starting in a few short minutes. Welcome to everyone who's in this room, and my sincere apologies for those in the standing room. We should have expected this, but we are well over capacity given the high degree of interest in today's session. So thank you all again for being here today, and I take this opportunity to reiterate, if you have not grabbed yourself a set of headsets at the entry, please do so. Today's session will be in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and French. Channel number 1 for French, 2 for Spanish, and 3 for English. Please do collect a headset at the entrance. Thank you very much. Mic test 1, 2, 3. Could I have an okay from the interpreters? English, Spanish, and French. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and welcome to the inauguration of the Hague Group. My name is Varsha Gandikota Nellutla, and I'm the co-general coordinator of the Progressive International. I'm honored to welcome you all today to today's historic session, where the 9 countries that stand in this room stand here as the conscience of the world. I'm honored to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Yvonne Dossab, Minister of Justice from the Republic of Namibia, His Excellency Mr. Alvin Botes, the Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation from the Republic of South Africa, His Excellency Mr. Assad Shoman, Special Envoy of the Prime Minister on Sovereignty Matters from Belize, His Excellency Mr. Roberto Calzadilla Sarmiento, the Ambassador to Palestine from the plurinational state of Bolivia, Her Excellency Carolina Olarte Bacares, Ambassador to the Kingdom of the Netherlands from Colombia, Ms. Isaura Cabañas Vera, Charge d'Affaires, the Embassy of the Republic of Cuba in the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and Ms. Mariam Tavis Elizea, the advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs from the Republic of Honduras, His Excellency Mr. Roseli bin Abdul, Ambassador to the Kingdom of the Netherlands from Malaysia, and Her Excellency Ms. Ramatoulaye Ba Epse Faye, Ambassador to the Kingdom of the Netherlands from the Republic of Senegal. I would also like to acknowledge the distinguished members in our audience here today, members of the Diplomatic Corps here in the Netherlands, special rapporteurs from the United Nations and independent experts from the United Nations Human Rights Council, members of the European Parliament, members of parliament from over 5 countries from across the region, and directors of international NGOs and civil society networks who have all worked tirelessly for the cause of Palestinian liberation. And I want to thank the members of the media who have lost more comrades than we can recount in Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people over the last 15 months. To open today's event, I'd like to invite to the stage Ahmad Alnauk, a journalist and writer from Gaza, to provide his testimony of the past 15 months of Israel's genocide. Thank you, Ahmad.
Thank you very much, everyone. So my name is Ahmad Al-Naouq, and I am from Gaza. In the beginning of this genocide, in October 2023, my family were sleeping in their home. It was my father, my 2 brothers, my 3 sisters, and all of their children, and my cousin. 21 members of my family were sleeping in their home, in the south of the Gaza Strip, in Deir al-Balah. When suddenly, while they were sleeping in their home, an Israeli airplane came out of nowhere and it dropped a bomb on my family home, killing all my family members. On that day, I lost my father, who was 75 years old, who was born during the Nakba. On the first day of his life, he lost his grandparents in 1948. I also lost 2 brothers. I also lost 3 sisters and all of their kids. 14 kids under the age of 13 were slaughtered. They were slaughtered as they were sleeping in their bed. Their flesh and their bones and their bodies and their blood mixed with the stones of my family home. All of them were killed while they were sleeping in their home. They made no crime. They committed no mistake. Their only problem was they were Palestinians and they were slaughtered. But this is not my story only. This is a story of thousands of Palestinian families who were wiped out during this genocide. Thousands of Palestinian families were killed in the same manner as my family did. But all of our problems did not start during this genocide. Even before that, Israel killed my mother by delaying her treatment to receive cancer treatment. And she died in 2020. This is not only my mother. Hundreds of other Palestinians were killed as they were waiting to receive a treatment because of the Israeli blockade on Gaza. This is our life, not only for the past 15 months, but for the past 76 years. We faced mass slaughter, mass killing. We lived as refugees in our home country and all around the world. We endured pain, we endured suffering, we endured blockade, we endured many wars, many massacres. And Israel, unfortunately, got away with all of that. Do you know why? Because there was no accountability. Because there were no groups like this will go after Israel. Because the ICC and the ICJ, unfortunately, did not go after Israeli war criminals. But now is a happy day. Now is an existential moment, a historic day for all of us, Palestinians and non-Palestinians. The Israeli army officials, the Israeli army leaders, and the apartheid regime in Palestine and Israel must not evade accountability anymore. We must go after them. Everyone who participated in war crimes against the Palestinian people must find accountability. Otherwise, we are failing our people. We're failing the Palestinians, and we're failing humanity. And please, I ask you, do not fail humanity. This is a responsibility that all of us share, that we Palestinians and you non-Palestinians, a responsibility not to let Israel get away with murder, not to let Israel get away with genocide. Never again is never again. My people, my family did not deserve to die in such barbaric way. The Palestinian people did not deserve and live in humiliation, lack of freedom, their entire life. Enough is enough. Finally, I would like to thank you very, very much. You give the Palestinian people a glimmer of hope that finally, and after many decades of Israel evasion of accountability, this is a glimmer of hope that Palestine will soon be free and liberated, and the Palestinians will eventually get their freedom and they will get their rights back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmad, for your remarks. Many of us here in this room were in The Hague the last time, almost exactly 1 year ago, when South Africa brought its historic genocide convention case against the state of Israel for its acts in Gaza. We had already watched Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, declare exactly what they intended to do in the Gaza Strip, repeatedly calling for its extermination. We had watched Israeli troops record themselves committing heinous crimes only for popular consumption. And we had also watched Western nations cheer them on with brazen contempt. We watched the Israeli regime lie, denying the killings that were being live streamed to our phones and to our televisions. And yet, we thought and believed that within the world's highest court, within the International Court of Justice, that these lies would not hold up. And they didn't, as determined by the provisional orders of the court deeming Israel's actions genocidal. But immediately after the hearing, then President of the United States, Joe Biden, issued a 335-word statement, many of you perhaps remember it, to mark the 100 days since October 7th. The words Palestine and Palestinians were absent and nowhere to be found in these 300 words. Immediately after the hearings at the International Court of Justice, Prime Minister Netanyahu called for an emergency press conference. He came onto the television and declared, "Nobody can stop us, not even The Hague." And that threat has only compounded since January of 2024, all the way until we meet now in January of 2025. For nearly 500 days, we've witnessed systematic violations of international law and international norms in Gaza and in the region, but enabled by powerful nations, providing the diplomatic cover, military support, and political support for these actions. And that complicity isn't just about Palestine alone. That complicity, that lethal complicity, has dealt a devastating blow to the very integrity of the United Nations Charter and its foundational principles, to the institutions of global governance with the sanctions against the International Court of International Criminal Court, or the dismissal of the orders of the International Court of Justice by the countries in the West. So for me, the selection of countries seated at this table here today is no accident. The assault against the Palestinian people echoes for most of us, especially coming from the global south, it echoes dark chapters of our own history. And these struggles remind us that injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere. So we may hail from different continents, but we share the conviction that complacency is complicity in such crimes. So what is the Hague Group? Why another group? What makes it different? This is a group for collective action at the national level, collective action at the international level, and collective action at the multilateral level. Because we live in an interconnected world, and as we've seen clearly with Israel's actions in Gaza, the mechanisms of injustice are found in the fabric of global supply chains. We know that advanced weaponry cannot be built without technology, without materials, without components from factories that span across continents. We know that they can't be shipped to be used against the Palestinian people without using ports and logistics networks that are on each of our own soils and each of our own territories. So by coordinating the commitments that many of these nations have already championed across our ports, across our factories, across our courts, the Hague Group aims to build a bulwark to defend international law. Just as the international community once united to dismantle apartheid in South Africa through similarly coordinated legal and diplomatic pressure, we must now unite to enforce international law and protect the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. The alternative would be, it's clear to all of us, it's extremely stark. The alternative would be surrender to a world where might alone determines whether laws matter and when they can be violated at will. So for that, I want to thank the members of the Hague Group in this inaugural moment for standing as a defense of humanity and the conscience of the world. Thank you again. And with that, I declare it open. In today's session, we will begin with the joint statement issued by the members of the Hague Group today, inaugurating the group and presenting our commitments. To read out the joint statement, I would like to invite Zain Dangor, the Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of the Republic of South Africa. Zain.
Thank you, Varsha, and Secretary General in other contexts is Director General. Okay. So I'll be reading out the statement as agreed to by all the representatives that will be inaugurating the group. And the statement is dated January the 31st, 2025, and it reads as follows. We, the representatives from the governments of Belize, the plurinational state of Bolivia, the Republic of Colombia, the Republic of Cuba, the Republic of Honduras, Malaysia, the Republic of Namibia, the Republic of Senegal, and the Republic of South Africa in The Hague, Netherlands, on this, the 31st day of January 2025, inaugurate the Hague Group. Guided by the purposes and principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and the responsibility of all nations to uphold the inalienable rights, including the right to self-determination, that it enshrines for all peoples. Grieving the lives, livelihoods, communities, and cultural heritage lost due to Israel, the occupying power's genocidal actions in Gaza, and the remainder of the occupied Palestinian territory against the Palestinian people. Refusing to remain passive in the face of such international crimes, and determined to uphold our obligations to end the Israeli occupation of the state of Palestine and support the realization of the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, including the right to the independent state of Palestine. Recalling the orders of the International Court of Justice in the case of South Africa versus Israel of the 29th of December 2023, which reflects a serious concern about the perpetration of crimes of genocide in Palestine, and noting the significant and diverse number of states that have joined as third states in the case to demand the condemnation and immediate cessation of the ongoing genocide. We also recall the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice of 19 July 2024 on the legal consequences arising from the policies and practices of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. We also recall the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice of 9 July 2004, which is the legal consequences of the construction of a wall in the occupied Palestinian territory. We recall the United Nations General Assembly Resolution, ARES/ES 1024, which was adopted on 18th September 2024 at the 10th Emergency Special Session, which endorsed the ICJ's advisory opinion of July 2024 and the commitment of member states to comply with the obligations under international law as reflected in the advisory opinion. We recall the International Criminal Court's issuance on 21 November 2024 of warrants of arrest for indicating, and I quote from that issuance, reasonable grounds to believe that Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Gallant each bear criminal responsibility as civilian superiors for the war crime of intentionally directing an attack against civilian population, the war crime of starvation as a method of warfare, and the crimes against humanity of murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts. We recall the order of the International Court of Justice in Nicaragua versus Germany of 30 April 2024, which, reminding all states of the international obligations relating to the transfer of arms to parties to an armed conflict, in order to avoid the risk that such arms may be used to violate the Genocide Convention and the Geneva Conventions in relation to Israel's conduct in Gaza and the remainder of the occupied Palestinian territory. We also recall the United Nations Security Council Resolution 418 of 4 November 1977 and the United Nations Security Council Resolution 591 of the 28th of November 1986 that, quote, imposed a mandatory arms embargo against South Africa. We recall all the relevant resolutions of the Security Council, including Resolution 2334 of 23 December 2016, which reaffirmed the establishment by Israel of the settlements in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem, has no legal validity and constitutes a flagrant violation under international law. Stressing that the legal norms violated by Israel include certain obligations of an erga omnes character that are by their very nature the concern of all states, and in the view of the importance of the rights involved, all states can be held to have a legal interest in their protection, emphasizing the need to ensure accountability for the most serious crimes under international law through appropriate, fair, and independent investigations and prosecutions at national or international level, and to ensure justice for all victims and the prevention of future crimes. Convinced that collective action through coordinated legal and diplomatic measures at both national and international levels is an urgent imperative to uphold the principle of justice and accountability that form the foundation of the UN Charter. We then declare our intention to uphold the UN Resolution A/Res/ES10/24 in the case of state parties to the International Criminal Court to support and comply with our obligations under the Rome Statute with regards to the warrants issued on 21st of November 2024, and to implement the provisional measures of the International Court of Justice issued on 26th of January, also on the 28th of March, and also on the 24th of May 2024. We declare our intention to prevent provision or transfer of arms, munitions, and related equipment to Israel in all cases where there is a clear risk that such arms and related items might be used to commit or facilitate violations of humanitarian law, international human rights law, or the prohibition on genocide, in compliance with our international obligations and consistent with the International Court of Justice Advisory Opinion of 19 July 2024 and the UN General Assembly Resolution A/RES/ES10/24. We declare our intention to prevent the docking of vessels at any port, if applicable, within our territorial jurisdiction, in all cases where there's a clear risk of the vessel being used to carry military fuel and weaponry to Israel, which might be used to commit or facilitate violations of humanitarian law, of international human rights law, and of the prohibition of genocide in Palestine, in keeping with the state's peremptory legal obligation to cooperate towards preventing genocide and other violations of peremptory norms by all legal measures at their disposal. We will take further effective measures to end Israeli occupation of the state of Palestine and remove obstacles to the realization of the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, including the right to the independent state of Palestine. We invite all states to take all possible actions and policies to end Israel's occupation of the state of Palestine. We call on all nations to join us in the Hague Group in the solemn commitment to an international order based on the rule of law and international law, which, together with the principles of justice, is essential for peaceful coexistence and cooperation among states. That is the statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Director General of the South African Foreign Ministry. I want to note that all members of the media will be presented with the final text of the declaration. If you have been accredited, it should already be in your inboxes. If not, please do contact our Press Director, James Schneider, to my right here in the blue suit. I would now like to invite remarks from the distinguished members on the panel, beginning with Her Excellency Yvonne Dossab, Minister of Justice from Namibia. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone in the room. The right to self-determination is sacred and cannot be applied selectively. And Namibia's presence here today is an indication that we understand its historical significance. Namibia is proud to be part of this historic moment, where we reaffirm that the right to self-determination is central in the recognition of human rights. Our long-standing solidarity will not wither until the people of Palestine enjoy the fruits of an independent state of Palestine. International peace and security are under imminent threat and attack in various parts of the world, and Namibia continues to join efforts aimed at reinvigorating the respect for life and dignity for all humanity, including the people of Palestine. In the digital age, the images of destruction and loss have become seared into our collective memory, underscoring the brutality of this conflict. It is unimaginable that 75 years after the Universal Declaration was adopted, that the people of Palestine have endured such horrific atrocities, now subjected to rubble as their homes, schools, and health facilities. The Pact of the Future and efforts such as this initiative must decisively guide our actions going forward. Multilateral institutions designed to implement international law, humanitarian law, and prevent war have been preoccupied with the escalation of violence in Gaza. However, the Human Rights Council the General Assembly and the Security Council have all been paralyzed by states who blindly support Israel as an occupying power without consequences and consideration for human rights of the Palestinian people. Namibia will again stand with other states before the ICJ as we join South Africa in their case against Israel, aimed at holding them accountable for genocidal crimes committed against the Palestinian people. While we welcome the ceasefire and the progress made in releasing detainees on both sides, every effort must be made to de-escalate the violence and this brutal war. The hope of peace and security for the women, men, and children of Palestine must not be compromised. We must protect the integrity of the ceasefire. In August 2024, Namibia revoked permission for the vessel of MV Catherine, suspected of transporting military cargo to Israel, to dock on its shores. We therefore reinforce our current stance in today's historic moment, and we call on all other states to take the same position in compliance with international law and the decision of the ICJ. When future generations inquire our contribution to Palestine's right to self-determination, our response must be that we took concrete measures, or we will be remembered as leaders who watched and did nothing. We welcome various decisive measures that have been taken and adopted by various UN bodies to call on Israel to account and bring the individuals and or state agencies responsible for such atrocities to book. Namibia has consistently championed global justice, exemplified by our firm support for Palestine's right to self-determination. Our commitment extends to other peoples facing similar struggles for peace and autonomy. As a country, Namibia reaffirms its commitment to the UN Charter and international law. To this end, we implore other governments to join this initiative, as it is a fortified step towards achieving peace for the people of Palestine. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister Dossab, for your remarks. I now call to the floor His Excellency Alvin Both, Deputy Minister of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation of South Africa.
Honorable Minister of Justice of Namibia, Excellencies, representatives of Progressive International. I would like to take the opportunity to thank the organizers of this event, which indeed marks a major step by states from the Global South to work collectively towards justice for the people of Palestine and for a more just and equitable world defined by the rule of just law. South Africa fully supports the declaration read out earlier. I would like to make some remarks on a few points that are pertinent to the issues covered by the declaration. On the 29th of December 2023, South Africa brought an application pursuant to the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide against the State of Israel for the brutal assault on Palestinians in Gaza. The attacks at the time of the application had already created what many observers were characterizing as a crisis of humanity and a living hell for Gaza's 2.3 million inhabitants, and had shocked the conscience of most in the world. South Africa sought to end the situation of unprecedented horror in Gaza by referring the situation to the ICJ, who is the ultimate guarantor of the Genocide Convention. We asked the court to order provisional measures to compel Israel to end its genocidal acts in Palestine. The ICJ made such orders, but Israel refused to abide by them. States supporting Israel sought to undermine the authority of the ICJ instead of enacting their third state party responsibilities to ensure that Israel meets its legal obligations. On the 19th of July 2024, the ICJ delivered a historic advisory opinion on the legal consequences arising from the policies and practice of Israel in the occupied Palestine territory, including East Jerusalem, declaring that Israel's 57th-year control over the Palestine territories is unlawful. The ICJ's decision reveals a pattern of oppression which includes breaches of the International Convention on the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, which condemns and prohibits apartheid, the unlawful annexation of land, the denial of Palestine's right to self-determination, and flagrant violations of sovereignty over natural resources. This, accompanied by systematic violations of international humanitarian law, is typical of settler colonial forms of oppression. The ICJ's opinion gives further credence to what Palestine has been saying for decades and what non-governmental organizations, including Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the Israeli NGO Ben Telem have said more recently, that Israel, ladies and gentlemen, is indeed an apartheid state. Despite the ICJ's advisory opinion and its provisional measures order, Israel continues to sow destruction in Palestine as it seeks to further depopulate Palestinian territories through force and unlawful occupation and its genocidal actions in Palestine. On the 18th of September 2024, UNGA voted overwhelmingly to endorse the ICJ's advisory opinion. This resolution therefore put in place countermeasures for Israel's breaches of international law. The resolution further welcomed the advisory opinion, which ruled that all states have an obligation not to recognize as legal the situation arising from the unlawful presence of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, and not to render aid or assistance in maintaining the situation created by Israel's illegal presence in the occupied Palestine territory. In the debate preceding the vote, member states argued that it was the collective responsibility of member states of the UN to hold each other accountable and to ensure that legal decisions of its apex court and the resolutions of the UN are both respected and implemented. Despite this, countries, most notably those that were at some stage settler colonial regimes themselves and have committed some of the international crimes that Israel is committing today, including the crime of genocide, continue to support Israel's unlawful presence and actions in Palestine. In contrast to this, today, this group of developing countries have gathered to agree on a program of action to defend the institutions of global governance, including the ICC and the ICJ, from egregious attacks due to these institutions having dared to hold Israel accountable. It is the proverbial international law subalterns that is the people and countries that many in the West believe that international law and its course we established to control that are at the forefront of building an international legal order that is just and fair. We wish to highlight that the international community cannot proclaim the importance of international law, including that of the UN Charter, if it is only applicable in some situations and not in others. As I conclude, ladies and gentlemen, as the international community, we should reject attempts to manipulate international law to pursue accountability for some, but to evade accountability for others. This is unacceptable, and we should not be complicit in Israel's endeavors to irreparably harm the institutions that we established to build a more peaceful and just world. South Africa will continue to champion within the institutions of global governance the protection and the fundamental right of Palestinians in Gaza. Notably, ladies and gentlemen, we'll continue to do everything within our power to preserve the Palestinians the right of existence as a group and as a people. We ask all states to walk this journey, freedom for the Palestinian people with us, and we remind, ladies and gentlemen, this August inauguration of the Hague Group that Nelson Mandela momentously declared that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinian people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. I'd now like to give the floor to His Excellency Asad Shuman, Special Envoy from the Prime Minister's Office on Sovereignty Matters from Belize. Asad, the floor is yours.
Friends and comrades all, especially the journalists, Belize applauds Progressive International for convening this group and the government of the Republic of South Africa for leading the way in seeking to bring justice for the people of Palestine, including by taking Israel's genocide for reckoning to the International Court of Justice, a case that Belize has applied to intervene in. In a profound and disturbing irony, the genocide in Gaza in the past 16 months is enabled by the very powers that established the world system of international law and humanitarian law. This genocide is flaunted by the perpetrators, including by shredding the UN Charter before the astounded delegates to the General Assembly, symbolically enacting what the Zionist state has been allowed to do since its inception. Belize is honored to be part of an initiative that seeks to uphold the right of peoples to self-determination, the erosion of which could pose an existential threat to Belize's peaceful and secure existence with territorial integrity. It is a right that cannot be bartered away, nor subjected to conditions. Decades ago, the architect of South Africa's apartheid politics, Hendrik Verwoerd, famously remarked, quote, "Israel, like South Africa, is an apartheid state," end of quote. The Zionist regime approved of the Bantustans created by the apartheid South Africa and now intends a similar fate for the Palestinians at best. That is to crowd 14 million of them into 13% of Palestine in an entity that would be nominally independent but totally reliant on Israel for its very existence. The real intent of the Zionist state, however, is to cleanse the land of all Palestinians. From as far back as 1917, when the British government assumed the right to dispose of the land of Palestine to immigrants from Europe, thereby creating a policy based on the extermination of the native, Palestinians have been denied the right of self-determination. They have been the exception to the norm applied to all others, while the Zionist regime has been exempted from observance of that and other basic international jus cogens norms, including the prohibition of acquiring territory by force. In its 2024 advisory opinion, the ICJ confirmed the Palestinians' right to self-determination to be peremptory, one from which no derogation is permitted. The court found that Israel's presence in the OPT is illegal and must be ended ASAP. The continuing denial to Palestinians of their inalienable rights and the impunity afforded to the state of Israel. Denial, impunity, two sides of the same coin. This is a critical moment in history when we either allow this exceptionalism and impunity to continue, or we take action to uphold international law and justice. It is the Palestinian people, including all refugees since the Nakba of 1948, the Palestinian people who have the right of return, and they alone who must decide their future through a genuine exercise of self-determination. Our declaration of commitments is hopefully only a first step in achieving the end of apartheid and colonialism in Palestine, and in ensuring that the principles of justice and inalienable rights apply to Palestinians as they do to all peoples. Thank you.
Thank you, Sad, for your remarks. I'd like to now call to the floor His Excellency Roberto Calzadilla Sarmiento, Ambassador to Palestine from the plurinational state of Bolivia.
Distinguished ministers, distinguished members of the parliament, distinguished friends, distinguished ambassadors, distinguished brothers and sisters, and members of the international press here present today with us. First of all, I would like to say that the plurinational state of Bolivia is fully committed to the principles of international law and international justice and peace. We have ratified our commitment to uphold and defend the principles and values enshrined in the Rome Statute as part of the fight against impunity of the most horrendous and barbaric international crimes and atrocities such as the crimes of war, crimes against humanity, and genocide. On October 20th, 2023, Bolivia became the first Latin American country to sever diplomatic relations with Israel in direct response to Israel's military brutal offensive in Gaza. And only on the 8th of October last year, as well, we suspended visa exemptions for Israeli nationals. These actions show our commitment, and Bolivia has expressed the solidarity to the Palestinian self-determination right permanently. It has condemned Israel's violations of Israel law, of international law, and its ongoing blockage and apartheid and genocidal actions to the people of Palestine, calling for international responsibility. We will not stop condemning these breaches that is affecting peace and stability and our consciousness as humanity. That is why Bolivia also filed last year at the International Court of Justice a declaration of intervention in the case concerning the application on the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip, which is led by South Africa versus Israel. Bolivia has been participating at the same time actively in the important process of the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, which developed last year, on the legal consequences arising from the policies and practices of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and the corresponding resolution in the United Nations resolutions on the commitment of the member states to comply with these obligations under international law as reflected in the advisory opinion. Last year, Bolivia made another effort showing this strong solidarity we have for the Palestinian people, and it took us 5 months to bring a humanitarian assistance from Bolivia to Egypt, which was blockade entering this assistance of the people of Bolivia to the people of Palestine through to this apartheid regime and blockage of Israel in the Gaza Strip. More recently, Bolivia, as a member of the Bureau of the Assembly of State Parties of the Rome Statute at the International Court of Justice, has fully supported and shared the declaration by which the Bureau expresses its deep concern over states refusing to comply with mandatory arrest warrants, but also over sanctions and measures against the International Criminal Court in its mandate of investigating and prosecuting and judging criminals. We stress the importance of the International Criminal Court in defending international justice in circumstances of attempts to undermine the court's independence and impartiality. We are witnessing with alarm a time hitting the international community with truly significant changes that are taking place in the world order, such as harassments and threats to multilateralism, rise of the extreme nationalism and expansionism, trying to undermine the rule of law, international institutions, violations, breaching conventions and international justice. Our commitment is shown today again with the support of the declaration of the Hague Group, together with the government of Belize, the government of Cuba, the government of Colombia, the government of Honduras, Malaysia, Namibia, Senegal, and the Republic of South Africa. Together, we will take further effective measures and actions to end Israel occupation in the state of Palestine and remove obstacles to the realization of the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, including the right to their independent state of Palestine. I would like to thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for your remarks. I'd now like to call to the floor Her Excellency Isaura Cabañas Vera, Charge d'Affaires, Embassy of Cuba to the Netherlands.
Estimados ministros de Namibia y Sudáfrica, enviado especial de Belice, embajadores, colegas y amigos. Es un honor para nosotros sumarnos a esta iniciativa de solidaridad con el hermano pueblo palestino, con la convicción de nuestro héroe nacional de que patria es humanidad. Agradecemos a Progressive International y otros amigos por esta iniciativa. Reafirmamos la posición histórica de Cuba en pos de la solución amplia, justa y duradera del conflicto, sobre la base de la creación de 2 estados que permita al pueblo palestino ejercer su derecho a la libre determinación y disponer de un Estado independiente y soberano con las fronteras anteriores a 1967 y con Jerusalén Oriental como su capital, así como que permita el retorno de todos los refugiados a su tierra. Asimismo, demandamos que se garantice sin más dilaciones el ingreso del Estado de Palestina como miembro de pleno derecho de la Organización de las Naciones Unidas. Ha sido justamente en virtud de esta posición histórica que Cuba ha decidido participar como tercer Estado en la demanda presentada por Sudáfrica contra Israel ante la Corte Internacional de Justicia. Cuba comparte e hizo suyas las preocupaciones de la República de Sudáfrica expuestas en su escrito de demanda y en las solicitudes de medidas provisionales presentadas a la Corte. Este caso, iniciado por Sudáfrica y secundado por más de una decena de países, debe entenderse y atenderse como un llamado urgente para detener los horrendos crímenes internacionales contra la humanidad de genocidio, castigo colectivo y apartheid que se están perpetrando contra el pueblo palestino. Cuba, defensora del derecho internacional, considera que, dentro del sistema de las Naciones Unidas, la Corte es la última esperanza del pueblo palestino y la salvaguarda de la Convención para la Prevención y la Sanción del Delito de Genocidio. La Corte se encuentra en un complejo punto de inflexión histórica, en el que la credibilidad del sistema legal que se construyó después de la Segunda Guerra Mundial amenaza con resquebrajarse definitivamente. El resultado de la opinión consultiva emitida por la Corte sobre las consecuencias legales de la ocupación israelí muestran clara evidencia de la ilegalidad de dicha ocupación y destaca las responsabilidades de Israel. Cuba está convencida del alcance universal de la Convención, la cual hoy deberá proteger al pueblo palestino del genocidio que comete el gobierno israelí. Reiteramos nuestra profunda preocupación por la continua escalada de violencia por parte de Israel en los territorios palestinos ilegalmente ocupados, en flagrante violación de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas y del derecho internacional, incluidas numerosas resoluciones de la ONU. Asimismo, condenamos enérgicamente, una vez más, el asesinato de civiles, mujeres, niños y trabajadores humanitarios del sistema de Naciones Unidas y la destrucción de viviendas, hospitales e infraestructuras civiles. Repudiamos la impunidad con la que sigue actuando Israel, dado que goza de la protección cómplice de Estados Unidos, que repetidamente obstruye y veta las acciones del Consejo de Seguridad, socavando la paz, la seguridad y la estabilidad en Medio Oriente y en todo el mundo. Hacemos un llamado urgente a un cese al fuego definitivo, de modo inmediato y permanente en la Franja de Gaza, y a que se permita la entrada urgente de la ayuda para hacer frente a la grave situación humanitaria que sufren los habitantes de Gaza. Igualmente, exigimos la retirada total y sin condiciones de las tropas israelíes de todos los territorios árabes ocupados, como una única vía para lograr la paz y la estabilidad en Medio Oriente. Cuba ratifica su solidaridad y apoyo al hermano pueblo palestino, víctima por más de 75 años de ocupación colonial y de flagrantes violaciones de sus legítimos derechos como nación. Reiteramos que Cuba nunca estará entre los indiferentes ante la injusticia. La causa palestina siempre podrá contar con nuestra firme solidaridad. Deseo concluir con las palabras del líder histórico de la Revolución Cubana, comandante en jefe Fidel Castro Ruz, en el discurso pronunciado en la 7ª Conferencia Cumbre del Movimiento de Países No Alineados en Nueva Delhi, India, el 7 de marzo de 1983. Póngase fin cuanto antes al genocidio del pueblo palestino, que tiene lugar ante los ojos atónitos del mundo. Protéjase el derecho elemental a la vida de sus ciudadanos, de sus jóvenes y sus niños. Respétese su derecho a la independencia y a la paz. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now call to the floor Mariam Tavaseli Zia, Advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs from the Republic of Honduras. Mariam, the floor is yours.
Distinguidos ministros, excelencias, invitados especiales, señores y señoras, amigos todos. Es un honor dirigirme a ustedes en representación del canciller Eduardo Enrique Reina y transmitirle a la Internacional Progresista su agradecimiento por haber incluido a Honduras en esta histórica campaña de solidaridad con el pueblo palestino. Estamos reunidos reunidos en La Haya para reafirmar al pueblo hermano palestino nuestro compromiso con el respeto del derecho internacional, el derecho internacional humanitario y la Carta de las Naciones Unidas. Desde el inicio de la guerra en la Franja de Gaza, ante el fulgurante deterioro de la situación humanitaria, Honduras llamó a consultas a su embajador en Israel y se posicionó en todas las instancias multilaterales a favor de un cese al fuego inmediato, la protección de los civiles y el acceso seguro y sin obstáculos de la ayuda humanitaria. Durante el 79 periodo de sesiones de la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas, la presidenta Xiomara Castro alzó su voz para exigir el fin del genocidio contra el pueblo palestino, denunciando el silencio de algunos países frente al bombardeo de más de 40.000 personas inocentes. Hoy sus palabras resuenan. Ese silencio se ha instalado y se ha traducido en un inmovilismo de la comunidad internacional ante el primer genocidio colonial transmitido en directo. Iniciando este año 2025, sabemos que la guerra en Gaza ha provocado la muerte de más de 47.000 palestinos, de los cuales 14.500 son niños, más de 111.000 heridos y el desplazamiento forzado y repetido de 1.900.000 personas, es decir, 90% de la población de Gaza. Sabemos también que 80% de la infraestructura civil en la Franja de Gaza, incluyendo los hospitales, ha sido dañada o destruida y que actualmente 90% de la población sufre de inseguridad alimentaria aguda. Estas cifras por sí solas demuestran que sin una verdadera voluntad política, el sistema internacional no tiene la capacidad de poner fin a la agresión genocida de Israel contra el pueblo palestino. Ante nuestros ojos, a pesar del cese al fuego en la Franja de Gaza, logrado bajo los auspicios de Qatar, Estados Unidos y Egipto, Israel está intensificando su ofensiva militar en Cisjordania, lo cual constituye una amenaza clara y directa de la extensión del genocidio al resto de los territorios ocupados. Debemos actuar. Honduras se une al Grupo de La Haya con la finalidad de coordinar juntos los esfuerzos que permitirán prevenir y sancionar el genocidio que está cometiendo Israel. Para ello, Honduras exige la aplicación de las órdenes de arresto de funcionarios israelíes emitidas por la Corte Penal Internacional. Exige el cumplimiento de la opinión consultiva y las medidas provisionales emitidas por la Corte Internacional de Justicia, que ordenan la desocupación de los territorios palestinos y el cese de los actos genocidas de Israel. Exige la prevención del suministro y transferencia de armas a Israel en virtud de la Convención sobre el Genocidio y los convenios de Ginebra. Exige la prevención del atraque de buques que transporten combustible o armamento militar que puedan ser utilizados para violar el derecho internacional y el derecho internacional humanitario. En nombre del Gobierno de Honduras, quiero reiterar nuestra convicción de que una paz duradera y la solución de dos estados que siempre hemos respaldado solo podrán lograrse mediante el respeto de los derechos inalienables que promueve la Carta de las Naciones Unidas, el derecho inalienable de autodeterminación del pueblo palestino, la rendición, la justicia, la rendición de cuentas para las víctimas y el fin de la ocupación ilegal y sistema de apartheid promovido por Israel. Por ello hacemos un llamado urgente a la acción colectiva e invitamos a todos los países a unirse al Grupo de La Haya y adoptar las medidas contundentes necesarias para garantizar que los crímenes cometidos no permanezcan impunes. No seremos cómplices de este genocidio. No permitamos que el silencio prevalezca frente a la devastación y la pérdida irreparable de las vidas palestinas. Es una obligación moral y la responsabilidad internacional de todos los Estados miembros de las Naciones Unidas tomar acción ante la amenaza de la paz y la seguridad. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mariam, for your remarks. I'd like to now call to the floor His Excellency Roseli bin Abdul, Ambassador to the Kingdom of the Netherlands from Malaysia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Versa. I try to be quick with my statement so that we can move on with the next item in our agenda. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, and good afternoon. On behalf of the government of Malaysia, I extend our gratitude to Progressive International for organizing this important event. Malaysia very much welcomed the commitment to collective action to the joint statement that was just presented just now. And we are very honored to be part of the Hague Group. Our resolve is guided by the principle of humanity, the integrity of the UN Charter, and the sanctity of the international law. To uphold this, impunity must end, justice must prevail, and the rights, freedom, and dignity of Palestinians must be protected. Ladies and gentlemen, after almost 500 days and almost 50,000 deaths, Palestinians finally experienced a reprieve with the much-awaited Gaza ceasefire, though violence persists. The systematic destruction of Gaza has left irreparable scars, underscoring urgent need for action to restore hope and rebuild Palestine. Therefore, Malaysia calls for the full implementation of the 15 January ceasefire agreement as a critical step toward sustainable peace. Continued, ladies and gentlemen, accountability, as mentioned by our Palestinian brother just now, is essential. Malaysia remains committed to supporting legal recourse at the International Court of Justice and hope members of the international community will work together to uphold its obligation under international law. To achieve accountability, historical injustices undermining Palestinian existence and rights need to be addressed. International law must not be misinterpreted or exploited to justify action such as the partition plan, which imposed injustices by granting the occupier more land than the original inhabitants. Rectifying these injustices require recognizing Palestine's statehood and ensuring Palestinian right to self-determination. Israel's repeated violation of the UN resolution demands scrutiny, and its action contradict the principle of the UN Charter. The imbalance of power marked by the apartheid policy and militarization leave the right to self-determination unfulfilled. Ladies and gentlemen, as we gathered here today in The Hague, let us reflect on these critical issues and work towards solutions that embody the aspiration of Palestinians and align with the collective voice of the UN General Assembly. The international community once united against apartheid in South Africa, and now we must summon the same resolve for Palestine. Malaysia remains steadfast in our long-standing commitment to the Palestinian cause and hope that the collective action in the joint statement that we have agreed today will be instrumental in preventing the denial of the Palestinian people of having its own state. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and thank you once again to all of the 9 nations forming this historic inaugural Hague Group today. For our closing remarks, I'd like to invite His Excellency Amar Ijazi, Ambassador and Head of the Palestinian Mission to the Netherlands. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Varsha, and appreciation to the noble efforts by Progressive International for making this gathering possible today, for coordinating and organizing the efforts. This is certainly historic moments in several ways. Today we see the effective cooperation between civil society and states at a level and at an era when so-called democracies are sanctioning their own NGOs for speaking up to Palestine and other concerns that are not in line with their biased policies. So thank you very much, Progressive International. Honorable Justice Minister of Namibia, honorable members of the Hague Group, excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, friends, I'm honored and humbled to be with you today in this historic solidarity campaign representing the noble people of Palestine as they continue their steadfast march to liberation and independence. Your unwavering and principled solidarity is a lifeline for the Palestinian people who battle not just the genocidal colonizer intent on our annihilation, but a general international order that has permitted, covered up, excused, and protected the colonizer. And in some cases, even funded, armed, and actively supported its war crimes. In a world increasingly overrun by right-wing populist fervor that derides laws and the construct of the inherent universal equality of all peoples, you have picked up the mantle, understanding that allowing one state to act with such unforgivable brutality and criminality with audacious impunity is a threat to humanity and not just those subjected to its crimes. Friends, we all took deeper and easier breaths when the ceasefire in Gaza was announced. But we must also be clear-eyed about what is happening there and across the occupied territory of Palestine. The bombs may have stopped raining down death and destruction on the civilian population in Gaza. But that does not in any way mean that the egregious crimes of the illegal occupier have stopped. They continue with impunity and a breathtaking sense of entitlement and criminality and escaping any kind of accountability. And our collective fight for justice and accountability must continue. As we meet today in the shadow of the Peace Palace, Israel continues to shatter the lives of 2.3 million Palestinians, assaulting their right to life and dignity by maintaining a choking siege on Gaza that deprives the displaced population from a chance to survive the utter devastation it has caused it. This, while the threat of renewed carnage still looms and they promise us with more to come. In Jerusalem and the rest of the occupied West Bank, hundreds of military roadblocks gut the territory, turning ordinary life's tasks into a humiliating nightmare. The Israeli military and Israeli terrorist settlers are waging a war on civilian population, as well as civilian objects, forcibly displacing thousands, disrupting education, and assaulting hospitals and paramedics. The declared aims of this genocidal campaign are not a secret anymore. They are announced day in and day out by Israeli officials. It is to take over Palestine and uproot and expel as many Palestinians as possible, using all crimes on the book and outside the book and all atrocities possible to do that. Israel is intent on erasing Palestine, and in the process, it is upending the only rules that promise humanity peace, equality, and dignity. It believes it can, and it will get away with genocidal and apartheid tendencies and all other crimes committed. Because until now, Israel has enjoyed a malicious exception to all rules of international law for decades. It is used to having been placed above humanity and legality. The declaration adopted today confronts this racist and dangerous notion of exceptionalism. The past 15 months of genocide have been horrifying failure of humanity of epic proportions. The situation in Palestine is apocalyptic, but it is even more terrifying when we understand that it is but an ominous foreshadowing of what can be normalized if we allow humanity to look the other way. Because that is the choice genocide allies and partners are giving the world. Abandon accountability on Palestine, and we will let the international system of laws crumble. Accountability is humanity's only hope to preserve itself. Accountability for all, accountability without exceptions or double standards. It is our historic and collective responsibility. Today is uplifting for Palestine and humanity because it's a reaffirmation that at the time when bullying and militarism and racism are at the rise, there are principled states and leaders who remain committed to our common humanity, to the truth that we are equal, independent. Our fates are intertwined. We must stand up to the destructive offensive waged against our common values and humanity. We must remain focused and relentless always, adding momentum, never tiring of the pushback. Today, South Africa, Namibia, Malaysia, Colombia, Cuba, Belize, Bolivia, Honduras, and Senegal are setting the example to uphold and protect the relevance of the international rules-based system. We thank you for that, and thank all of those parliamentarians, writers, individuals, and everyone from every walk of life who stood beside justice when the threat was high and when bullyism was at its best. Today is an important day not only for Palestine, but for humanity as a whole and for the international rules-based system. I'm honored to conclude on behalf of the Palestinian people by restating our deep appreciation for your active act of solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and thank you once again for the remarks from the panel to all of the distinguished guests from the 9 nations leading the Hague Group in this inaugural moment. I'd like to now open for the press conference and invite members of the media to ask questions. To moderate this part of our event, I invite James Schneider, Press Director of the Progressive International.
Thank you very much. So, well, as you can see, it's a slightly unusual press conference because there are so many people who could respond. So I think what we'll do is if we can take questions in groups of 3 and then different members can answer multiple questions at the same time. So can I have indications for the person to start? If you can say your name and affiliation, please.
Hamish Morrison from International, and this question is to all the panel. Obviously this is a step forward in the sense of concrete action, but 9 countries is quite a small group. I just wanted to ask whether there was sort of any indication of the impact this is going to have as Group 9 and what efforts are going on to expand that.
Thank you.
Hi, Niels Goedegeburen from the Dutch National News Agency, ANP. Question about sanctions against the ICC that the US Congress is working on. What should the Netherlands as a host country do to protect the courts from these sanctions? Thank you.
Stephanie Mopa from Le Monde. Did you invite other countries to participate in the group, and especially countries from Europe, maybe from France and from European Union?
Well, okay.
Thanks, Matt Kennan from Palestine Depot. I just had a question about the accountability, because obviously it's very important that Israel is held to account, but the genocide that we've seen over the last 15 months is also an American and a British genocide. So I wondered if there were plans to expand the accountability to those states, because Israel's genocide could not have happened without those states. So the war criminals or suspected war criminals in those states need to be held to account too if we're going to have real accountability and justice for the victims of the genocide.
Thank you. Zain Dangle, can I ask you to...
I'm not going to answer all of them. I've just
on sanctions.
Mandated to answer the one on sanctions. So I do think that part of what this statement reflects is, as our Deputy Minister pointed out, a commitment by the international legal subalterns to uphold a system that was designed to punish them. And we see the sanctions against the International Criminal Court as not an attack on the court or the officials of the court. It's actually an attack on the sovereign nations that have essentially decided to be parties to the Rome Statute. Because if you look at the Rome Statute itself and the principle of complementarity, it's an apex court in all our systems. And an attack on the court and its officials is essentially an attack and sanctioning the sovereignty of all of us, whether it's a sanctions on banks that work with the ICC or any other form of sanctions. It's really a sanctions on the sovereignty and the sovereign choice of state parties. And we need to reflect on that. It's not individuals, it's not the prosecutor, it's not the judges. It's the state parties that are being sanctioned and challenged. And so we have a grouping here of not all that are state parties, but there's a number of state parties to the Rome Statute that have been complicit in the genocide, that have sought to look the other way, that have sought to reinterpret the immunities for heads of state in a manner that could absolve Prime Minister Netanyahu. And I think it's on those state parties to also reflect that they made a sovereign decision to join the Rome Statute, and that the sanctions is a direct attack on them as well. So I will leave it there and I'll go take my seat.
Thank you, Zain. To answer the question about why this bloc and could we have a bigger group, the answer is yes. If you look at the UN resolution that was adopted by a majority of the nations in September 2024, barely any countries, I mean, or the handful of countries that you would expect to abstain or to oppose, a handful of them, but a majority of the countries, over 124, stood in support of a list of commitments to end the Israeli occupation in Palestine and to hold them accountable for the actions and violations of international law that have been committed over the last 15 months. So this group that we have here today is by no means, of course, the comprehensive group, but they are the champions in having displayed how at the national level you can take actions through state policy across legal, economic, and diplomatic levers in order to uphold international law and the multilateral institutions. If I may break protocol for a brief moment, the expansion of this group has been the top of mind for all of us. I think much of our conversation over the last few weeks has been, oh, we should also get Ireland into the group. We should also get much of the other Southeast Asian nations into the group. And these are open invitations that remain. This is not the culmination of this process, but rather an inaugural moment where the attempt is to demonstrate what is possible through collective action. And the invitation from the bottom of our hearts, if I may speak on behalf of the nations present here today, is for every nation, at least those that voted in favor of the UN resolution of September 2024, to now back their words with policy at national and international levels.
Can I invite Minister Yvonne Delsab to respond, please?
I think for me, just on the question of impact, I think it's important to understand, and again, I speak, from the context of Namibia, who comes from an apartheid background, a country that comes from a genocide background, that it's only sustained action and also solidarity that could bring you to a place where you can see results. When Resolution 435 for our independence was passed, it was way in the 1970s. It was a number of countries on the continent and elsewhere that started to agitate the independence of Namibia that led to our independence many, many years later. So we want to, and I want to borrow from the gentleman that had the testimony about what happened to his family, and we want to just also say to him that we stand with you. It must be difficult to have lost not only your mother earlier, but in such a brutal fashion your family, that it is that glimmer of hope for us, that every small action we take to support the people of Palestine is certainly a step in the right direction, but also a step worth to take. We are willing to take as long as we can to see the freedom of the people of Palestine. Thank you.
A couple more questions and then some more responses from the panel.
My name is Stephanie Vandenberg from Reuters. I have a question for the representatives of South Africa. You are now very firmly supporting the arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu and calling on other states to carry it out. It wasn't so long ago that South Africa challenged the arrest warrant of Omar al-Bashir and refused to arrest him on South African grounds, also for political reasons, and made an argument before the court for immunity for heads of state. I wonder how you square these positions.
Thank you. Other questions?
I'm Floris van Straten from the Dutch newspaper NRC. All of you sitting behind the table could be described as representatives of southern countries of the south. There are no countries from the north. Is that not a sad reflection of the state of international law and the divide about that?
Thank you very much, Rosie Burchard for DW. First of all, just a quick factual clarification. Are any of your governments changing any laws or policies or actions based on this joint statement today, or is it rather committing to paper what you've already been doing and inviting other states to do the same? And then just to follow up on the question from my colleague from Reuters to the Deputy Minister, you talked about that there cannot be an international community proclaiming international laws important when it's only applied in certain cases. How would you respond to critics who say that that's essentially what South Africa has been doing with regards to the provisional measures against Russia from the ICJ, with regards to President Putin's arrest warrant, and South Africa keeping up rather a close partnership with Russia in spite of that? Is that misplaced criticism, or how would you respond? Thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask Ambassador bin Abdul from Malaysia to respond to some of the questions, or if one of the other?
I can take over.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I would leave the specific questions to be answered by relevant, but we're certainly here to discuss the inauguration of this group, and I think it's better to focus the questions around this. But nonetheless, I'll go through most of what has been asked. First, in relation to expansion of the group, yes, there are many states who have showed interest in relation to this, to joining, but because of the speed that we wanted to move forward with, we were not able to encompass all of these states, and therefore many will join down the road. And I have to say that there are many groupings in different settings that do support the state of Palestine, whether it is the committee at the UN or whether it is within political groups. But the difference is that this group is putting actionable measures in relation to holding Israel to account. And they have already done these actions in several ways individually. And now we're collectively putting this effort together in order to move forward and ensure that more and more states, we don't just talk the talk, but we walk the walk in order to hold these criminals and those who violate international law accountable. Well, in relation to the sanctions on the ICC and whether it is the Netherlands' responsibility, yes, the Netherlands has more responsibility than others to protect, ensure the work of the ICC is without interruption and that it is independent. It has that extra burden of the host state, and it has been upholding that. But it is not only the responsibility of the Netherlands. And it is baffling for us, as has been mentioned in the South especially, to see that most of the outlets that ask questions here are not concerned about the US sanctions. They're not discussing it in their media outlets. They're not bringing it to the forefront. Yet, when a country refuses to implement an order towards this leader or that leader, especially there is an interest in one specific leader, we don't hear the end of it. It's continuous, it is there, and you pressure us in each and everywhere. We think that justice should be implemented equally and in equal footing in everywhere. We saw the discrepancy also on the coverage when it comes to Gaza. People were dying, by themselves without really covering the exact reasons what's happening to the people there. So that discrepancy needs to be, and it's not a north-south split. I disagree with this notion because many in the north today are very concerned about the international system that is based on the law. Today we have a case before the ICJ that was brought by a country that cannot be further away from the question of Palestine, and that is Norway, and has no stakes there. In fact, they have a historic friendship with Israel, but yet they could not take anymore the violations and the level of obstinance and the level of disregard to international law that Israel has been exhibiting all along, including the closure of international institutions that provide humanitarian aid to the Palestinian people. So it's not true. We have principled countries like Spain, Ireland, Slovenia, and Norway that recognize the state of Palestine in the course of this genocide, to say enough is enough, and Palestinians are people that deserve a right. So it's not a split between North and South, it's a split between those who only follow their interests and those who are willing to uphold and move forward to respect international norms, knowing that ignoring them will affect us all and will go back to the dark ages where might is right and destroy humanity and the work that we have been building upon for the past 75 years onwards. Thank you.
Perhaps Mariam Tavasolize would like to respond to the question about changing state policies.
Bueno, lo voy a hacer en español, no hay problema, ¿no? Para nosotros, tomar acción en cuanto a la cuestión de Palestina es una urgencia y por eso estamos aquí en La Haya. Como lo dije en mis palabras, realmente nosotros en cuanto vimos el deterioro de la situación humanitaria en Gaza, lo primero que hicimos fue llamar a consultas a nuestro embajador. Nuestra acción inició ahí. Hemos apoyado todas las resoluciones en el Consejo de Derechos Humanos, en la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas, en el Consejo de Seguridad, para apoyar al pueblo palestino. Y queremos seguir en ese sentido apoyando la causa palestina. Entonces, todo esto es muy progresivo, obviamente, porque no podemos, nosotros estamos ligados a nuestras obligaciones internacionales, pero evidentemente tenemos que ir de manera progresiva. Y esa es la intención detrás de la presencia de Honduras aquí, es tomar medidas cada vez más fuertes para impedir el genocidio, para prevenirlo. Gracias.
And perhaps I could ask Assad Shoman to respond to the question about the North-South divide and the question about enhanced responsibility and complicity from other countries in their support for Israel.
You refer to the fact that Israel could not be carrying out this genocide without the support of, as I mentioned, the very countries that claim to have established a new system since the Second World War that would ensure that the horrors that occurred during that period would not happen again. And it is those very countries that, in fact, are carrying out the genocide. If we are frank and honest about what is happening, Israel could not possibly do what it has been doing for so long without the full support of some of these Western powers, principally, of course, the United States of America, but not excluding countries in Europe such as the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and others. Now, how do we are, I think you said, somebody said, the subaltern nations. How can we force the hand of these great powers? We can't yet, but we will be able to over time. Because this is a small group now, but it will grow. It will have to grow in the same way that the comrade from Namibia mentioned how that grew over time. The problem here is that it took so long for that to happen. And the same with the South African apartheid situation. It took decades of work. And we can't afford that much time now. So we really have to call on not just states, but on peoples all over the world, in Europe and North America especially, because they have to make enough noise to convince their governments to stop the crimes that they are committing. This genocide is not just Israel doing it. It's all these powers that are guilty and that they have to be brought to account by their own peoples, really. So that we have to depend and we have to try and stir up the conscience of the peoples of these countries and to get civil society, ordinary people, to stop just living their ordinary lives and watching the horrors and the massacres, unbelievable things that you wouldn't have believed possible. You know, like the videos that the Israeli soldiers show, you know, of the atrocities that they are committing, boasting about it. That they only do that because they know that they will not be held to account. And they know that because of these Western countries supporting that. So our job has to be to try to stir the conscience of peoples in these countries, as well as in our own countries, to do everything we can. Never rest for a moment, as long as these atrocities are taking place. And, as I think a couple of people have mentioned, ceasefire doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean the end of the suffering. The end of the genocide doesn't mean the end of the problem. There's apartheid still. How can we sit here and allow an apartheid nation to exist? What right does a nation that is a genocidal, an apartheid nation or regime, that regime has no right to exist as such? And we have to factor that into our minds and stop this nonsense about the right to defend and so on, which is what? Right to kill, not to defend. And so really it is a call for the conscience of mankind and womankind, I should say, throughout the world, but especially perhaps in the Western nations where it can make a difference in forcing their own governments to change the policy and to stop the apartheid, stop the genocide. And above all, give the people of Palestine the right to self-determination, because if you do that, everything else will fall into place. Of course, you can't have right to self-determination if there is no self, and that is the policy of the Zionist regime, to eliminate the selves, the individuals, get rid of all the Palestinians, clean the land, which has been their policy and their intention from the get-go, from the beginning. And the world has just allowed that to continue. Hopefully, the horrors that they see now, if they think about it properly, they will see it was inevitable. It is inevitable. A colonial settler regime must exterminate the native. That must be its intent. And they've been hiding it for some time, and people have been pretending that that is not so. But I think the realities of what they're seeing now will convince everybody that we can't tolerate that anymore. We can't allow this impunity to go on, because, I mean, you know, I blame us, the international system, the international countries. If we had stopped impunity 50 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, what is happening today would not be happening. So the blood that has been spilled is on the hands of the international community, and in particular of those Western countries that not just tolerate, but support and feed that genocide.
Thank you. Can I invite Deputy Minister Alvin Boats to respond from South Africa? And then afterwards, Minister Dausa from Namibia.
Oh, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I think let me just foreground my contribution and response. I think the ICJ, through its provisional measures, have actually confirmed the public personality of the State of Israel, because I think both state and non-state actors over multitudes of decades knew actually what happened. And us presenting ourselves to the ICJ as the key guarantor on behalf of the Palestine people have actually demonstrated to ordinary people through the public hearing the personality of the Israeli state. So that's obviously the first issue. The second matter is that South Africa have learned the hard ways, one through the apartheid regime, but also in relation to the centrality of multilateral organizations, in particular such as your ICC. You would recall that in 2015, there was an occasion, the AU Assembly of Heads of States that was convened in South Africa, and the ICCF issued a criminal indictment against the president of the person of Sudan. At that specific time, the South African government interpreted that because there's a convening of a multilateral organization on its soil, therefore your certain immunities applied to heads of states and of government. So that was our interpretation. The courts in South Africa then wrapped us over the knuckles and says, no, you have not domesticated any exemption, and you are obligated to effect a criminal indictment by the ICC. Now the big question is, have we learned from that? In 2023, just preceding the convening of the BRICS heads of states and heads of state of government, the ICC issued a criminal indictment against the person of the Russian Federation, head of state. We communicated, ladies and gentlemen, to the Russian Federation that we have a sensual obligation to execute the criminal indictment. Now you would appreciate it was very complex because there was a indication made or statements made that any attempt to infringe on the person of the head of state of the Russian Federation would be regarded as a declaration of war. So we invoke quite unique diplomatic mastery to ensure that our bilateral partner understands that in South Africa, what informs us as a nation is that our freedom have been born out of constitutionality. So that was key and critical. And it is for that reason, ladies and gentlemen, that when we say we are a champion on behalf of the downtrodden, the vulnerable, what it should be interpreted is that we are a champion of multilateralism, about deepening of multilateralism, utilization of global governance institutions, and the centrality on the occasion of the 80 years of the United Nations, the centrality of UN organs that should be respected by all 193 member states of the UN. So we have learned and we have self-corrected. And our appeal, joining the Hague Group, is essentially a convergence of both state and non-state parties that are obviously, advancing on the matter about accountability based on international rule of law. That is our key and critical issue. Of course, this August organization will continue to champion the centrality of the two-state solution, because that is ultimately what is the consequent resolutions and outlook of the United Nations. Thank you very much.
I would like to add on the question about what is the impact of this group. I would like rather to reverse the question. What is the impact of sitting and closing our eyes? What is the impact not having an international justice? What is the impact of not saying nothing? What is the impact of not having a tribunal for Nuremberg? What is, many questions are here. What is, if we wouldn't have stand for recovering our democracies during the dictatorships in South America, we wouldn't have today in Bolivia a democracy which has 33 years of life and rights and respect and tolerance and pluralism. We wouldn't have had today a plurinational state of Bolivia who respects the rights of indigenous, the rights of the others, the rights of women, the rights of not everyone has to think the same, but I think we are showing, every country here is showing that has been doing different efforts, and we were not sitting and silent and not seeing nothing. I think this is the question we have to see. The impact, referring to the impact of what is doing the Netherlands, I think the impact of a country like Nicaragua, who put a case at the International Court of Justice in regard to the transfer of arms, had an impact also here in the Netherlands. And you can see it here in the courts, the impact of this action of a small country, but it had an impact on the international behavior here in the Netherlands. We think that certainly the Netherlands is not only the one as hosting the International Court, the Criminal Court, responsible. The impact will have for the people, for the prosecutors, for the judges, for the families of the judges, for the institution, and as has been said, also for all this complementary where it is sanctioning the system of international justice. So it is sanctioning on the values and the principles we believe. So I think it's sanctioning the accountability. So this is something that is not, it's more than only to the Netherlands, because then the sanctions will come for the banks. So you will not be able to operate these banks. So we have to see, okay, what we are going to do, because the court is from everyone. And of course, we accept that we have different and differentiated responsibilities. But these countries here are taking their responsibilities, and certainly other countries and bigger countries have other responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister Joseph, do you want to come back? Yes, please.
I think just a quick one to say that the fact, at least from a Namibian perspective, the fact that we've joined this group is an indication of some of the work that we've already done, some of the actions that we've already taken, the way we handled the issue of the vessel. And if you look at our statement earlier today, reflect some of that. So we want to expand, if you'd like, on some of the actions that we've already taken. From a ruling party perspective, we have a very clear policy on self-determination, just from a policy perspective. So, the National Assembly in Namibia has also taken on some motions that specifically address issues pertaining to Western Sahara, to Palestine, to Cuba. So the actions that we take are often a reflection of some of the principal positions that we've taken as a country over the years. Thank you.
All we've got time for, I'm afraid, so I'll hand back to you, please, Varsha, to conclude. the day's events.
Thank you, James. To answer briefly one of the questions from the media earlier on, is this new state policy? There are events in history that really mark a before and an after. 10 months ago, I think if you had asked anyone on this table, is reaffirming the ICC, does that form new policy? Perhaps the answer would have been no. But it appears that we're no longer in that moment. We're in a moment where countries like France that have for decades championed international justice and the institutions of global governance as the sacrosanct, sacred institutions that you could never break, have somehow turned their back on them. We see countries like Austria, countries like Hungary, where obligations of compliance, despite being state parties to the court, are seemingly available to be defied and jurisdictions to be questioned. So if you look at the proposed first measure, even though in some instances it might appear like a reaffirmation, it's really important to acknowledge the context in which the Hague Group is being formed. One, of course, of urgency, but also in response to a very real threat to what we thought was obvious. So in a situation where the obvious is no longer the obvious, the sacred is no longer the sacred, this group coming together to say we actually do stand by international institutions and will comply with our obligations as state parties to the jurisdiction, to the Rome Statute, or in the case of non-state parties, respect the UN resolution that we have all collectively signed on to ensure accountability for serious international crimes. So for me, that is state policy in a moment where we have seen defiance from extremely powerful nations around the world on questions that might have been considered status quo or obvious. The second bit that I want to address is the aspect of coordination. While let's assume there is no new state policy, as someone that cannot comment on the different timelines of cabinet deliberations, I see some friends in the room here today that work on campaigns like No Harbor for Genocide. We know for a fact that stopping vessels, stopping ships at different ports isn't just a question of political will. It's also a question of political capacity, because somehow globalization and the interconnectedness of all of our nations has only benefited one side. It hasn't benefited us in being able to determine when there is a ship that wears a disguise of a civilian shipping company, but is actually harboring and shipping military equipment over to Israel to be used against the Palestinian people in Gaza. That requires coordination. So what we see now has, of course, been championing of multiple policies from the nations here today, but fragmented does mean that it curtails and restricts our ability to be able to track a single ship that goes from one port to the next, to the next, to the next, to be able to, ultimately, for good, sever that artery of the genocidal machine. And that aspect of coordination, I think, is something that's incredibly key, and we hope to build until it engulfs the entire world when we have more and more members in the Hague Group that ultimately, again, engulfs the entire world. So thank you for the questions from the media. And with that, I'd like to conclude our press conference for today. Thank you once again for the press, to our distinguished members for answering the questions at the table. I know we're incredibly behind schedule, so I do want to take this moment to apologize and thank you all for your patience. In closing, really, all I can say, in one of our earliest preparatory meetings, my colleague on the advisory committee, Guillaume Long, remarked, the 31st of January may well just go down in the history books. Today, after listening to the excellencies at the table and hearing the commitment to collective action to build at national, at international, and between the two at every lever possible to stand for the people of Palestine, it does feel like history has been made today. So I want to thank you all for coming here today, to our distinguished members in the audience. And once again, on behalf of the Progressive International, we express our collective solidarity with the people of Palestine and for Palestinian liberation, and commit once again to make solidarity more than a slogan. Thank you very much.